What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to yet another edition of Trojan Dash. I'm Nathan Ackerman, one of your two wonderful co-hosts on this show, and today I am joined, as I am every week now, I can say that every week, it's true in our new weekly format, I am joined on Trojan Dash by Anthony Gharib. Anthony, how are you doing today, my good friend?
I'm doing good, Nathan. We're doing this with light, so I'm kind of adjusting, but I'm doing good. What about you?
Oh yeah, we started late as we always do because that is how Trojan Dash just does it around here. So let's get right into it. USC had a rather up and down, largely down week. They lost to Arizona before bouncing back kind of with a win over Oregon, only to go to Colorado for a pivotal game in Boulder, lost that one, and then you think, okay, they can get back on track against the Utes, an around 500, sub 500 team. Nope, they lose that one. All of a sudden, the Trojans, who were once in the driver's seat for the Pac-12 regular season championship, do not control their own destiny. They need to win out, obviously. Well, they have one more game left, but they need to win that, and they need a little bit of help. We'll get into more of that later. But Anthony, tell me what went wrong for USC among the many things that went wrong for the Trojans in those three losses against the Wildcats, the Buffaloes, and the Utes.
Yeah, well, the main thing was that they were just outworked, especially against Arizona. I know we talked about it last week a little bit, but they just didn't have the effort and just weren't really assertive on the offensive end, and the defense was really just fluctuated. They seemed pretty lethargic on that end. And then going against Colorado and Utah, or the Utah loss was just probably the worst performance of the season. I know I'd probably thought of that before the Colorado or after the Colorado game, but Utah was as bad, even worse. And I think in terms of that, the Utah game, they just looked tired. And Andy Enfield talked about it after the post game last night. He said that trip really just tired them out, made them feel just exhausted on the defensive end. The effort was low, and they weren't really playing with the type of energy that we're used to seeing. So it was their defense that really fell, and they just couldn't get any buckets on the offensive end because they weren't getting any stops. And, specifically against Colorado, and they were just making every three like no to man, no matter what, he was going in. And, if you're playing a game like that against Colorado, especially with players like McKinley Wright, Jariah Horn, they just went off. And they just weren't able to get stops at any point, whenever it counted, anytime they needed to get a bucket down or they needed to get a stop, Colorado would respond with a three. And the same thing with Utah. Anytime they needed one stop, they just couldn't get it. It was a trip to forget for sure. The mountain trip, which is always tough, but those three losses, really the main things. The defense was just out of it, and even though that they weren't really out rebounded by a large margin, it really did feel like that they weren't able to get any loose balls, and those were really the main differences in those losses.
Yeah, and it came down to me for the scrappiness, right? Against the Wildcats in the first of those three losses, I was like, okay, I wasn't terribly concerned about that one because Arizona was hitting all their shots. The Trojans made it close kind of late. They were playing not a terrible basketball game, right? It certainly wasn't great. They lost by like 9 points, but it wasn't their worst performance of the season, right? And then they bounced back against the Ducks with one of their best defensive performances of the year. They got off to a 17-1, 15-0 start, and it was like, okay, that seemed like a little bump in the road, just a blip, a fluke, whatever you want to call it, right? But then they go back against Colorado and Utah, and you kind of touched on this, and Andy Enfield touched on this in the press conference after the Stanford game, which we will talk about in 5 minutes or so. But they just seemed like they were playing at 50% speed, right? They seemed like they weren't fully there mentally, physically, whether it was the altitude, whether it was playing so many games in a short span, whatever. I mean, I'm not going to try to get into their minds and like tell you what was affecting them. I'm sure it was a combination of both of those things. But it just seemed like the sort of physical, scrappy, loose ball, energetic, fighting for every possession team that you've seen throughout that you saw against Oregon, right? It just wasn't there in those last two games. And I was kind of worried about that, to be honest, because I always keep on saying, I say this every single week, I'm like a broken record now. If they're going to go deep in the Pac-12 tournament, they're going to go deep in March Madness, they're going to have to win those close, hard-fought, scrappy, maybe low-scoring games, right? And if they're not able to do that against teams like Utah, They're not going to be able to do that against teams like UCLA in the Pac-12 tournament, against teams like, they beat Oregon, but they're not going to be able to do that again against teams like Colorado. We saw that, right? So, and then of course, once you get into March against all the good teams that are out there that aren't in the Pac-12. So those were particularly concerning losses to me. I didn't really see them consistently. I think they averaged 77 points against in those three losses against three teams that they have good offenses, but like Utah's offense is nothing special, right? So I didn't really see that, I guess, because this is a good defensive team. Like they entered play on a Wednesday, holding opponents to something like a 39.26% on the season, which was like number 13 in the country. They allowed 65 points per game. So this is a good defensive team, and we've seen that all season. But the fact that they were playing such lethargic basketball and it just seemed like they were kind of stagnant at times, right? It was that this isn't the time of the season we want to be doing that, right? This is the time of the year when you want to start feeling like the stakes are getting higher and you want to start playing energetic basketball. And they weren't doing that. And I think that's why they ended up losing those three games. They just seemed like they didn't want it as much. And I'm sure they did. I'm sure they were tired. I'm sure they were altitude, affected, whatever, all of those things. But just watching the product on the court, it seemed like it was a different team. So I think that's ultimately what did them in. Yeah, they didn't hit a ton of shots and things like that, but I think it's defensive end. And I think the Stanford game, which again we will talk about soon, was a particularly good sign, because if they had bounced back and won a game like 85-75, you would have said, okay, at least they won, but the defense still isn't there. They're still not playing as aggressive, as physical as we've seen them playing, but the way that they won that game, allowing 17 points in the first half, 42 points on the night, was a great sign. And I think, yeah, it was like the title says, they're a rough patch at a bad time. And obviously it has them in a hole where, the Pac-12 title went from not probable, but certainly within range, within their grasp, whatever, to now they need some help. And I think, again, those are things that I don't see affecting them long term. I think that this is an energetic team. Yeah, we did kill Stanford. They did kill Stanford. So, yeah, it wasn't particularly I'm not particularly concerned that we're going to see that team again. But the fact that we saw it 3 times in 4 games toward the end of the regular season, definitely something to watch moving forward.
Yeah, the main thing against those games against Colorado and Utah, you touched upon it. They were seemed exhausted, and the effort was low. And when you're not, especially on the defensive end, you got to be energized. You got to want to make an extra effort. And when you're not making that doesn't matter what school, what team you're playing, no matter what, if you're not going to put effort on the defensive end, you're going to lose. And that's just what happened, plain and simple. But like you said, bounce back game was what they needed against Stanford, which we'll talk about right now. Sure.
Yeah, well, let's talk a bit about that game. Let's talk about Mr. Utility, Drew Peterson. I like that nickname, Scott, in the chat. Taj Edey, Drew Peterson combined for 31 points. Peterson adds 9 rebounds. The Mobley brothers with 8 each. But the story of the game, USC allowed 17 points in the first half, which was the fewest they've allowed all season. I think the previous low was against Utah the first time they played them, when they allowed 18 points, so they managed to beat that. They had 6 points with 5 minutes to go in the first half, which is just insane. That's not a lot of points. So USC obviously played one of their best defensive games of the year. Tell me, what were the biggest pros from, obviously there were many. They won by 37 points, which the USC basketball Instagram posted is their largest conference victory, 1967, right? They destroyed them. What were the biggest reasons you think, Anthony, as to why they were able to do so?
Yeah, well, you talk about it. It started with their defense, and they were just looking to stop the ball, and they were being more aggressive on that end. And the other thing was they were controlling the boards, and it was just so evident watching that. They were just flying for rebounds, looking to grab it and just get a hold of that ball. And that was something that we saw, or that they really didn't do against Colorado and Utah and Arizona. I mean, they were getting handled. They were handling Stanford. I think the margin was about almost 20 rebounds. So if you're going to out-rebound the opposing team by 20, then you're probably going to win the game by a lot. So the main thing was really the rebounding, and obviously them on the defensive end can't be understated. I mean, I think I saw a tweet that 10 minutes of the first half, Stanford was projected to score only 8 points in the entire game, which is just unbelievable. I mean, 8 points. So they were really aggressive on the offensive end. But like was mentioned in the chat, Mr. Utility, Drew Peterson, that's the biggest positive in my opinion, because he had struggled mightily in the past couple of weeks. He got benched, and then to get really his confidence going, this was just a huge game for him. I think he had 15, 9, and 5 off the top of my head. So that's a really great all-around performance. He seemed more aggressive on the offensive end. He seemed really assertive, and he was just getting it done. And that's probably the biggest positive that I think. And also the emergence of Max Agbankpolo, who has been outstanding recently. He's been getting his shot down. We talked about it after the game. Earlier in the season, he wasn't hitting consistently, and now he's finding his rhythm. He was already an outstanding defender with lots of great length, but if he gets that three down, and that just adds another layer to the team. So there were many positives, and really the main ones that I could point to was just the defensive effort. They really wanted it more, and obviously Stanford, they were undermanned. They didn't have Oscar da Silva, who was a big part of their team, but it just felt like it didn't matter. I mean, USC just wanted that game more, and you could tell watching it. They were energized. They were just looking to get the win and obviously bounce back, and it was a big win for them for sure. Like you said, the biggest conference victory since 1967, which is pretty crazy. I mean, so just that stat shows that they were putting in effort that they hadn't really done in past couple of weeks, and they got a big win that they deserved. So now going into the next week, hopefully they can carry it on. But what went right is just simply the defense and the rebounding, because like we saw, I mean, the defense, if they get stops, then they can get easier baskets on the other end, and it gives them more momentum. But just that defensive rebounding, that's the character of this team. If they can stop you and they can control the boards, and they're really going to be a tough team to beat.
I think you mentioned a couple minutes ago about a tweet you saw about halfway through the first half that Stanford was on pace for 8 points. Was that my tweet? I think that might have been my tweet, so I just want to take the credit where it is due there. Thank you very much, sir. But yeah, USC drove in the paint and played aggressively on defense. I think that's pretty much the story of the game, right? You saw them. They're the tallest team in the entire country, and it seemed like they used that to their advantage last night, right? You saw them playing big. You saw them playing physical, and you saw some of the smaller guys, some of the guards, like doing the same thing, playing physical, not really allowing themselves to get shoved down low, right? And I think once you establish that paint presence, if you couple that with a night where Stanford was not shooting the ball well, and credit to the Trojans for that, they didn't really give them many open shots. There were a lot of, late in the shot clock, like kind of heave it up kind of things where I think something like their top three scorers entering the night that were active, because two of them were out, went like 1 of 8. Zaire Williams did, and then Spencer Jones went like 3 of 9, and then Jaden Dallaire went like 3 of 14. So, I mean, that pretty much sums it up right there. You're not really going to win games when your best players are shooting the ball like that. But a lot of that was because the Trojans were forcing them to take bad shots. They were forcing them to take rushed shots. And I think the biggest thing that this Stanford win did for this team was it gave them confidence back, because I think one of my favorite moments of the post-game press conference was when Max Agbankpolo, he was asked like a pretty basic question, something like, what is the whole COVID and the weird like basketball environment taught you about your team? And he was like, he gave some answer like, yeah, it's been tough, whatever. And then he goes, we are good. I mean, we're really good this season. So, I mean, that pretty much sums it up right there. And I don't think that that's a thing. I mean, they during the 3 of 4 skid, they knew that they were still a good team, but I don't know if that's something that you would have heard them saying after losing to Utah, who, again, not a good team. Sorry, Ute fans. They're just not a great team. I mean, I guess I don't really have much to say because they just beat the Trojans, but the Trojans beat them earlier in the season, so whatever. They split 1-1. But point is, that was a game that seemed like it took some of the wind out of their – they weren't firing. They weren't – I don't know. They didn't have the same mojo that you've seen them have all season. And that's something that you need, right? Going into Pauley, playing the Bruins with again, the 1 or 2 seed in the Pac-12 on the line. They're going to have to win that game. They're going to have to go deep in the tournament, because now they've probably played themselves into the 6 or 7 seed range. I mean, they were looking at sort of a 4 or 5, maybe even a 3 a couple weeks back. But then when they lose 3 or 4, when they're not really peaking at the right time, you sort of move that bar lower, I guess. But if they can make waves in the Pac-12 tourney, then they can definitely get themselves back up to a 4 or 5. And they're not going to do that if they're not confident, because this team thrives off of that, right? They thrive off of energy. They thrive off of confidence. They thrive off of knowing that they're a really good team. So I think that was super important there. Scott says, Oregon State beat Oregon in football this year. Let's hope for a sweep in basketball. Certainly possible, right? The game's on the road for the Ducks. Rivalry matchup. Oregon State's going to want to beat them. They know what's at stake for them. I could definitely. I don't know if I would put my money on it, just because it seemed like the end, especially of the Oregon UCLA game. Oregon just seemed so fired up. They seemed like they were scrappy. They seemed like they were playing physical. They seemed like USC was playing in the entire Stanford game, which is how they need to play, right? So again, it could totally happen. We'll see. Obviously, if the Ducks lose that game, then the winner of Bruins Trojans is your Pac-12 conference champion, but the Ducks can put that all to rest if they take care of business against the Beavers. But yeah, back to the point, what went right against the Cardinal? Pretty much everything. They were hitting their shots, right? The Mobley brothers, I think this is the third game in which both of them played, because Isaiah didn't play against Oregon, that they've been held under 20 combined points. But it seems like when they have their sort of off nights, I think Evan was 4 for 9 from the field, Isaiah, something like 1 of 3 or something like that. It seems like when they have their off nights, you have guys like Taj Edey, guys like Drew Peterson, who have really been picking it up. And I think Peterson, as you guys, Scott, and you have both said, it's good to see him get out of that slump that he was in a couple weeks back. I think like in the previous 8 games before the Oregon game, he was like 16 of 54 from the field, which is obviously not the kind of production that you want to see there. He's moved out of the starting role, and then ever since then, he's been playing very well. 9 more rebounds too. So, leading the team in boards, second on the team in points. He's been playing really well, and I think he's going to be a really important part of this team moving forward. And I think that was one of the best, most promising signs for the Trojans against Stanford as well.
Yeah, I mean, you touched upon it, obviously, but, we can't understate Drew Peterson, because he really elevates this team. And this was, I think he started this game as well. So this was the first time that he had started since being benched. So getting that confidence back is just super important. And it really just elevated this team, and he brings so much more to them from the offensive end. He's an outstanding rebounder. There have been multiple games where he's been up there with Evan and Isaiah Mobley in terms of controlling the rebounding margin. So that was obviously the biggest thing that I can think of. I don't know if I haven't checked the free throw percentage. I don't know if it was positive.
It wasn't much better, but. Yeah, but the big thing about that game was they didn't take that many of them, right? I'm never going to trust this team to make like 85% of that. I mean, 85% is super good, but I'm never going to trust them to make 75 to 80% of those, right? But when you have the games where they're not playing to draw the foul, which I think I saw a lot of that against the Utes, right? They were sort of playing recklessly. They were just like going in, trying to draw charges, or trying to draw blocking fouls, and then got called for charges. That happened several times to a bunch of different guys. But when they're playing not to draw the foul, but they're playing to get buckets, right? They seem to get buckets. And when you avoid the free throw line for this team, you're generally going to fare better when you shoot free throws as poorly as this team does. I think there was something like 8 of 13. I don't know if that was the final line, but once it was garbage time, at one point it was 8 of 13. Which is somewhere around like 60-something%. I'm not a math whiz, but it's something around that. Which again, not great. But if you're only leaving 5 points on the board there, it's certainly better than being, 10 of 20 and leaving 10 points there. And again, when you're playing close games, that could definitely come back. But let's talk about some of those close games that we could see in the Trojans' future, because I have a feeling there will be a lot of them. USC at this point, Colorado plays Arizona State tonight. And at this point, depending on USC's game, the Colorado game, and the Oregon game, the Trojans could be anywhere from a 1 to a 4 seed. They still They automatically have a bye in the first round of the Pac-12 tournament because, they were going to be a top 4 seed anyway, but with the Arizona self-imposed postseason ban, the top 5 seeds get byes, whatever. Basically, if Oregon loses to the Beavers, then the winner of the USC-UCLA game is the conference champion and the 1 seed. If Oregon wins, then USC could win that game and be the number 2 seed. If USC loses, then they're the 3 seed. If Colorado also loses, if USC loses and Colorado wins, they are the 4 seed. A lot of different things can play out. I don't know who's going to win the UCLA game. I could see that going either way, really, even with the Trojans beating them by like 18 points back in late December, early January, something like that. But tell me, what do you think the Trojans need to do against UCLA in the Pac-12 tournament to set themselves up to succeed in March Madness? And you can define succeed however you want, whether that's winning 2 games, winning the championship, being a top 5 seed, whatever. Give me what you think the Trojans have to take care of this weekend and next week in Vegas to, I guess, be riding a high, if nothing more, going into March Madness.
Well, first, I have to mention the fact that, UCLA just stunk it up for everyone. They couldn't just beat Oregon and just have it be a winner-take-all Saturday matchup at Poly. I mean, they just had to ruin everything like they always do, these damn Bruins. I don't want to get added. I'm just saying it's the truth. I mean, we could have had such a nice matchup, but now we have to rely on Oregon State. Whatever. I don't want to talk about it. Anyways, I mean, they've got to do what they did, the last time they played. They've got to control these guards because UCLA has so many dynamic guards, Tiger Campbell, Johnny Juzang, and now Jules Bernard has really evolved. And one of my favorite names in the world, Jaime Jaquez Jr., a flat-out baller. They've got to figure out how to stop all 4 of those guys. And obviously in this matchup, I think Cody Riley will be playing, so him matching up with Evan Mobley. They've got to figure out, okay, what are the type of lineups that they're going to be matching up with? Are we going to run 4, or not really a 4, but really a 3-forward type lineup against UCLA? They've got to really get down defensively. They've got to control the rebounding margin. It's just those are the 2 things. You got to stop. You got to play great defense, and you got to control the rebounding margin. And that's just 2 biggest things. And they've got to really figure out how they want to contain these guards. In the first game, Ethan Anderson wasn't starting. I think that was like one of the first few games he's been back. Now he's obviously been back for a while. Will Andy Enfield look to put him back in the lineup, maybe just to match up with the guards? I would be surprised if he does that. But, in terms of after UCLA, hopefully they can get the win. But in the Pac-12 tournament, let's just hope we don't play Colorado. I'll leave it at that because Colorado, in my opinion, just matches up perfectly with this USC team. They're big. They've got a really dynamic guard in McKinley Wright. So, that's just my main thing with the Pac-12 tournament. I think that they can definitely win it, and I think, in my opinion, in terms of success for the season, it would definitely be winning a couple games in March Madness, just going to the Sweet 16. If they make it to the Elite 8, that's great. If they lose, fine, no big deal. That's a great success in my opinion. So, that really happens with winning Saturday, and then let's say winning a couple games, even if they reach the Pac-12 championship and they lose, still on a good high and getting some momentum going into March Madness. But it really starts with just the things that we've talked about before: controlling the rebounding margin, playing great defense, especially against those great guards that UCLA has. And obviously Evan Mobley, he has to be more aggressive. It just can't be any more of these 4 of 10, 4 of 11 games. He's got to be more aggressive. He's got to be more assertive, and we'll be celebrating if that happens. If he's more aggressive, then we'll be celebrating a Pac-12 championship and hopefully a couple wins in March Madness.
Yeah, I think, you talked about Colorado, and to me, I don't know if Colorado is necessarily the best team in the Pac-12. They certainly could be, but I think between, UCLA, Oregon, Colorado, and USC too, I don't know if there's a definitive 1 through 4 ranking there. But to me, I mean, as we've seen this season, Colorado might be the most dangerous, especially for this Trojan team, because, we saw them beat Oregon. We've seen them beat UCLA. And they just can't seem to figure out Colorado. And the games haven't been particularly close either, right? When you get a guy like McKinley Wright going, and then they have it. I mean, it seems like when USC plays Colorado, it's not always right? It's somebody else stepping up in the background, scoring like 23, 25 points. And they just seem like they're one of the more physical, one of the more emotional, one of the more energetic teams in the Pac-12. And it seems like when USC has an off night against them, I mean, you can see them scraping by against UCLA, against Oregon. I don't know if they can necessarily scrape by against Colorado if they don't have one of their best performances of the season. But I want to walk back a little bit on a take I gave on last week's show. I said that I do not care about the Pac-12 tournament at all. And if you go and you watch that back and you sort of analyze it, you read between the lines, right? What I really meant was that assuming they win the Pac-12 regular season crown, I don't really care about the Pac-12 tournament. I know it would set them up to get a better seed in March Madness, but to me, the way that the Pac-12 champion is determined by the regular season, that's what matters the most to me. And when USC was in first place there, and it seemed like they were closing in on the Pac-12 regular season crown, if they had won that, I wouldn't have been like heartbroken if they went to the Pac-12 tournament and either didn't win it or even if they got knocked out in the second round, whatever. But given the way the last week or two has played out, dropping 3 or 4, going from in the driver's seat to needing some help, needing an upset to win the Pac-12 crown, assuming they don't win that, assuming, whether they lose to the Bruins or whether, Oregon State or Oregon wins or whether both of those things happen, assuming they don't win the Pac-12 regular season crown, I think it would be somewhat disappointing. And again, it wouldn't be the end of the world for this team that, again, was supposed to be good but wasn't supposed to be like, powerhouses in the conference or in college basketball this year. But given how they played and given how good we've seen this team can be, I think it would be kind of disappointing if they didn't win at least one of those. Obviously, if they were to finish second in the standings and then finish second in the, lose the championship game in the Pac-12 tournament, you'd probably see them end up with something like a 5 seed, which I don't think anybody can really complain about. But I think it would be cool to see them win the Pac-12 title. As you said, or the Pac-12 tournament, as you said, it would have been really awesome to get a crosstown rivalry between the Bruins and the Trojans straight up for the Pac-12 crown. But the one time that USC needed UCLA to help them out, they, of course, in typical Bruin fashion, as you said, could not get it done. Unfortunately, we are running low on time here on this show, as we did start a little bit late. Only a minute or two this time, which is pretty good for us. But Anthony, do you have any closing thoughts about USC, about the last couple of weeks, about the future? I hope everybody gets the SpongeBob reference in the little title right there. But anyway, sorry, Anthony. Any final comments before we wrap things up here on Trojan Dash?
Yeah, just win. That's it. I mean, just don't do any, just don't mess up. That's it. Just win it. That's all they have to do. I mean, I know it's pretty simple and, wow, Captain Obvious. Yeah, just win, obviously. But I mean, that's really the point of the season they are right now. I mean, they're in March. This is when it matters. So you got to just close out, finish out strong, even if you're playing against, or not having the best of days or best of games. Just at least put the effort out there and try to be more energized and just close out the season on a high note. It's been tough, especially with all the COVID restrictions and all that. So just try to end the season on a high note.
We will see. That is going to do it for this edition of Trojan Dash. As a reminder, we are weekly now. Make sure to check us back here next week. Depending on the Pac-12 tournament bracket, we're going to might have to shuffle with the schedule a little bit. But we did that this week, and you all tuned in, so that won't be an issue at all. As a reminder, as always, make sure to check us out on all our various platforms: Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, you know the deal. Check out our content at dashsports.tv. We also do columns with Sports Pac-12. Anthony does one of those. He's got some great work over there. As we said last week, retweeted by Isaiah Mobley. Big accomplishment for you, Anthony. Congratulations on that. Make sure to check us out every single week on Trojan Dash. Make sure to check out all the other wonderful shows on your favorite Pac-12 teams here on Dash Sports. A wise man once said, just win. We'll see if the Trojans can do that, and we will talk to you next time.